Hey everyone, this is my 2D top-down game, Trigger Red, an action game where your survival comes down to how efficiently you tear down your enemies. Today, we're going to talk about the first playtest, and what's come out from it. Before we get into the details, let's address a couple things. First, yes, it's been 4 months. Last devlog, I mentioned working on other projects. They didn't really go as well as I'd hoped they would. I wanted to try learning a bit of Godot during the holiday break, and the game I thought I'd build with that was an Inscription-inspired roguelike based on chess, which was hard. After I sank a couple weeks into it, I decided to drop it and maybe one day return to it in the future, but unfortunately that means I don't have anything to show for it. Second point, yes, I finally settled on a name, and along with it, a logo, including an alternate logo that fits in with the main menu. I'll touch more on this later. So, if it's not clear, I've been pretty busy, and the lack of updates were not due to neglect, but rather things taking a bit longer than I anticipated. I conducted my first real playtest, gathering some friends from various backgrounds and getting them to play through a range of levels, trying to explore the breadth of the game's difficulty and content. Some players did me the favour of recording their experience, and others opted to fill out a response form I'd written out. Before my playtest even went live, there were a couple of last-minute additions I managed to sneak in. The most notable of which was a dash ability, which just lets you pass through any source of damage without being struck. We'll focus a bit more on this later. To avoid dwelling on the rest of the additions for too long, I'll show them on screen now. Most of these boil down to fairly basic functions you'd expect from any game. At a certain point, I realized I was being non-committal and decided to just have the playtest go live. There are a couple of key pieces of insight I was looking for, like, is the game fun? Is the planning phase an engaging mechanic? And should I even keep developing? Based on the responses, yes, no, and yes, which was sort of a problem. Very early in the playtest, I was informed that the planning phase just sucked to engage with. There was a complete lack of quality of life features, which meant people clicked every enemy and never looked back, even if they were actively diverting from the path and being punished for it. They refused to return to the planning phase to try a new route. This raises a really big dilemma, because remaining feedback on the game was wholly positive. People really liked the combat phase. This culminated in me patching through some additional quality of life features, like an interactive enemy list to slightly adjust the route, and a reset button to completely clear it. But even with these changes, there was a distinct lack of engagement from those who tried playing afterwards. The real issue was that I had no faith in the planning phase, and left it bare bones in a bid to work on debatably more important mechanics. Even now, I still think there's a chance I'll cut the planning phase in the future, but without the planning phase, it feels like a significant element of what sets it apart from other nondescript top-down action games might be lost. This might mean I've spent months of developing a mechanic on life support, but sometimes you gotta take a shot in the dark. Speaking of developing for months, what exactly has changed about the planning phase? Mainly a bunch of quality of life changes. Basically, every aspect of the planning phase now provides feedback in some way. Enemies can be found by hovering over the enemy list and vice versa. Their position in the list is highlighted when hovering over the enemy itself. Only the direct connections are displayed through the route line under that context, and the number of enemies remaining is displayed on screen. Even the final enemy is now pointed out. I wanted interacting with this mechanic to be as seamless and understandable as possible. You can also actually see the route now. A huge point of feedback was that the old line was basically impossible to see, so after about 2 weeks of tearing my hair out over shaders, I managed to figure out this inverted scrolling line implementation, which I'm feeling pretty good about right now. To make it a bit clearer what's coming up, certain enemies will also change the line contextually with simple icons, which are also reflected up above on the enemy list. There are a couple more changes I want to add to the planning phase, namely a way to more specifically adjust the path, such as having the path go through a specific glass wall, which the standard path wouldn't account for, as well as having the path be intrinsically tied to the player's score, so there's an immediate degree of risk versus reward, where players are rewarded when considering additional factors beyond what is the most efficient route. But this can only be implemented when I actually delve into creating a proper scoring system beyond simply tracking the time. So, what else came out of the playtest? The planning phase was certainly the biggest point of feedback, but there were also some other pain points that, despite not having been fixed yet, ought to be talked about and some solutions proposed. One major element the playtest lacked was any form of tutorial, and it unfortunately led to a whole lot of confusion. Of course, I didn't expect everyone who played to have seen the devlogs, so I wrote out a set of instructions on the basics of how to play, as well as a little description on each of the enemy types and how to defeat them. If you're an aspiring game dev out there, do not do this. So many aspects of the feedback came down to friction points that could have been resolved with mechanics readily available to the player. That being said, there were some things that weren't clear to the player despite elements on screen telling them otherwise. Primarily, there were a lot of players completely forgetting about the energy meter mechanic, often dying and not understanding what exactly happened. The obvious reason is down to the fact that all the information is hidden on the edges of the screen, mainly the energy meter but also the ammo count, not made any easier by the low contrasting colours. The player is so focused on the action in the middle of the screen, almost everything beyond it might as well not be there. There are a couple of ways of solving this, but the two that interest me the most is attaching the information visually to the player character or the cursor, ensuring that it's always in the player's eye view. Another issue that arose with readability was knowing the differences between enemy types and what their weaknesses were. I am partially at fault for this. I didn't have time to add any custom art for the enemies, so the only differences were the colours of their clothes. But even with this variety, people would get them confused. I think some clearer shape language is necessary here, and some way to pick specific enemies out beyond their design, which really means that my idea to use the same generic body rig for every character will likely not work. Certain enemies will need different body shapes and slightly different appearances that will require unique animations. Mechanic-wise, most players opted to completely ignore the slowdown, dash, and camera extend controls. Those players that did explore these mechanics generally favoured the dash, an opinion I generally align with. There is something undeniably satisfying about dashing through a huge shotgun blast of bullets. As time goes on, the slowdown feels less useful, but I received some positive feedback, so it'll remain for now, although it might slow down less than it currently does. As time goes on, it also becomes clear that a dedicated camera extend button is basically useless, so that'll likely get cut entirely. Balancing-wise, the game is a bit of a mess, and there are a couple of key issues to discuss here. When discussing the enemies themselves, there is a clear disparity between the melee enemies and the ranged enemies. Shotguns are the bane of your existence, and pistols can catch you off guard. Melee enemies, on the other hand, are basically non-issues, and rarely make themselves a threat to the player. Surprisingly, many players were comfortable tanking hits and immediately resetting their energy meter. There ended up being a disparity between emerging playstyle and what I intended. In my head, I felt it was fine to be able to tank a shotgun blast from full health, and it would put you in a pretty dire situation if you don't knock someone out soon. But completely resetting the energy meter removes any repercussions. I almost decided to detach the mechanics from each other entirely and have any damage be fatal, but I was advised against it. This decision was reinforced by the wide breadth of skill between players. Some people were able to clear the most difficult level in about 3 tries, while others were stuck for hours. There's a really fine line I need to be careful of here, but my gut tells me to make enemies more dangerous, not inherently fatal, and encourage dashing more, making surviving these hits more of a skill-based mechanic rather than a matter of brute force. Another key element of balancing surrounds the weapons. Certain weapons ended up being too powerful and the player was able to overly rely on certain strategies. Thankfully, the alternate enemy types and their immunities were successful in forcing players to adjust these strategies, but in certain cases players would simply re-equip a thrown gun rather than discard it completely. My solution to this is twofold. Buff melee weapons by making them execute enemies faster, making them a direct upgrade to going with fists alone, and 2, nerfing guns by reducing their ammo or having the clip only partially full. This would hopefully encourage a more frantic playstyle, where swapping out weapons is more common and feels like a part of the experience rather than an unnecessary setback. Finally, the largest balancing issue, literally, is the sheer scale of some levels. The last few levels available in the playtest were simply too large. Having to click through such a large number of enemies in the planning phase basically killed any of the players' interest in rerouting, even with the quality of life changes. And levels were so long, players would forget the type of enemies they'd be coming across, despite the planning phase existing to give them a chance to preview them. I believe the largest an individual sprint should ever be is around half the size of this level, and it would probably be better to segment longer levels into multiple screens, possibly as different floors of a building or different buildings entirely, each with a planning phase in between to break up the energy. I'm actually not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm pretty sure it's going to basically break everything I've already set up a couple times over, so this is basically last on my to-do list for the current stretch of development. The last piece of feedback I wanted to address was general thoughts about the aesthetic and visual design of the game. To put it simply, the response was a bit flat. The game just doesn't capture any particular aesthetic, and the style it does have was described as a little generic. So I'm breaking the one rule I gave myself 2 devlogs ago. Hypotheticals aside, there was one thing I knew for certain. I don't want to do pixel art. Yep, we're doing pixel art. Despite it eliminating another element that sets it apart from a particular game, I have more experience producing higher quality pixel art at a faster rate than continuing in the original style. The playtesters seemed pretty supportive of the idea, so when I finally settled on the name for Trigger Red, I started out by drawing up a logo in pixel art, as you've already seen. It's still a work in progress, but I'm fairly happy with where it's at and how it represents the game. And that's basically the outcomes of the playtest. Generally speaking, I am terrible at taking constructive criticism, so it takes a bit of time for me to process the feedback and try and view it objectively, but I think the outcome is generally pushing the game in a positive direction. I've been pretty deep in the programming hole, so my next focus will likely be geared towards shifting to pixel art throughout the game. If that sounds like something that'd interest you, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll know the moment it comes out. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment. Thank you.